Thank you, Ashley. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Shkoyach. All right, good morning, Chaver on Zoom. You hear me all right? Great to see everyone. All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tafshin Pei 5785, the Tilsim Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shuman Drushos this year as a zuchos for Besoros Tovos for all of Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Stephen Terry Zinn, in honor of the birth of their granddaughter Devorah Eliana Zinn, and in memory of Dr. Zinn's father Bonim Tzvi Ben Chaim Zichron Devracha. Shmuel Rabin Karapkin, in the Schos of Refuah Shlema for Rabin's cousin serving in the IDF, Binyamin Chaim Pesach Ben Moshe Chana, and creation of the yard site of Rabin's mother Pesam Bira Bas Chana. Dr. Moshe and Ellen Gevant, in memory of Dr. Gevant's parents, Yaakov Meir Ben Moshe Leib and Shena Bas Abba, and Dr. Bezadi Yamina Salfer of Los Angeles, in merit of a speedy and full recovery of Esther Bracha Bas Chaya. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Baruch and Bracha Rivkin, creation of the yard site of Rebbitzin Malka Rivkin, Malka Bas Tzvi, Zichron Livrach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in the Chama, all of those who need a refuah, should have one together with Kol Chol Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shalom Yeretz Hashem. Return our hostages b'shalom and b'karav, and our holy soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. Well, so with that, let us begin with a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kuf Nun 150, and we are picking up at Mirat Hashem. We are picking up on Kuf Mem Tes Amud Beis 149b, 246 lines up from the bottom. Some of the Abayim. So we actually began this a little bit. Remember again, the Mishnah said that, or the Brisa said, Shir Karka Kolshu was speaking about, remember the idea of if a Shchimira makes a matana. So remember again, essentially the matana of a Shchimira is considered to be a matana with a tanai, with a condition. And what is the condition? I'm gifting this property assuming that I die. Assuming that I die, which by definition means if he doesn't die, the gift reverts. There's an exception to that, and the exception to that is if the Shchidnera goes ahead and retains property for himself. If he goes ahead and retains something, so that indicates that this is not really a deathbed gift, right? But rather, again, this is just a regular gift, and therefore, even if he recovers, the gift that he made remains. So the Gemara says, I said, Lashon was Shir Karka Kolshehu, if he retains any amount of Karka. So before in the Gemara, we were discussing the idea. Maybe it doesn't just mean karka. Maybe it means metaltlin. To which the Gemara essentially answered, well, no. Karka always means karka. So the Gemara now is going to challenge that assertion. Karka dafka, is that true? That wherever halacha l'maisa, again, the Gemara says karka, that karka always means actual karka. V'hatzanan we learned, hakosev kol nechasav la'avdo, if a person writes his entire estate to his eved, so in this case over here again, I have an eved. And what do? I gift my entire estate to the eved. So what's the halacha? The Habos say now, just to understand the dynamic embedded in this is as follows, which is, an eved obviously is part of that very estate. So I have an estate and I have an eved. An eved is part of my estate. So the shaila is, when I go ahead and I gift my estate to my eved, I am effectively going ahead and freeing my eved as well. That's inherent in the gift. So the Gemara says, so if a person goes ahead and literally again gives his estate to his eved, the eved not only acquires the estate, but obviously also acquires himself. Shir karka kol shehu lo yatsa ben chorin. But if the master retains some amount of karka for himself, then what? Then halacha l'maisa, the eved doesn't go free. There was interestingly enough, so the idea over here is avodim are hukshila karko. So an eved is compared to karko. So therefore we're concerned that if the master says like this, I hereby go ahead and gift my entire estate to my eved, but I'm retaining karka. Now that's the lashon. He says I'm retaining karka. So we're concerned that karka retention refers to the eved himself. So the Gemara says, Lo Yas ben Chorin, Reb Shimon says, the Olam ben Chorin, Ad Shiyomar Kol Mechasai Nisurin Leploni Avdi Chutz Me'echad Ribo Shebahen. On the other hand, Reb Shimon says, no. In reality, the Eved always goes free. Whenever there is a gift of an estate to the Eved always goes free, unless, of course, the master says, Kol Mechasai Nisurin Leploni Avdi Chutz Me'echad Ribo Shebahen. Here's the difference. If the master says, I hereby convey my estate to my Eved, and I'm retaining 1/1000th for myself. So the concern over there, Shimon says, the concern over there is that in that percentage, in that 1/1000th, is the Eved himself. Is the Eved himself, top of Kufnun, 150a, V'amr Avdimi, Bar Yosef, Amr Velazar, Asu Metaltal and Shir Eitzel Eved, V'lo Asu Metaltal and Shir Eitzel Ksuva. So this is interesting. And Rabbi Bar Yosef said that halacha l'maisa, that they made metaltalin a shear by Eved, which means, let's say the Adon were to say, I hereby give my entire estate to my Eved, but I'm retaining some metaltalin. We're concerned that halacha l'maisa, maybe in that metaltalin is the Eved also. So therefore, again, but however, that doesn't apply to Ksuva. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't apply to Ksuva. So first, I'll take a look at the Rashbam. Tab Rashbam on Kuf Nun Amud Aleph. V'amr Avdimi Amr Belazar Asu Avagav Diktani Shir Karka Kol Shu Lo Yatsa Ben Chorin Hu Adinim Shir Metaltalin Kol Shu Da'av Dinami Ki Metaltali Dami Shre'enim Mechubel Karka V'Kar Le B'nei Adam Metaltali. So we'll say, so the idea over here is that what Rav Dimi is adding on is that if the master says to the Eved, I hereby give you my estate, but I'm retaining some metaltalin for myself. So just to clarify in this case, if the Adon were to say, I'm giving my estate to my Eved, but I'm retaining field A for me, the Eved goes free, because he's explicitizing what it is that he is keeping. New word. Again, couldn't end off the week without a new word. Hey, so again, always important to build our vocabulary. So again, but same idea. If you were to go ahead and so the issue over here is when he goes ahead and retains karka, but he doesn't identify which karka that may refer to the Eved. Reb Dimi comes along and says, by the way, it's not just true. Well, the Gemara just says it's not just true with karka, also true with metaltalin. If he goes there and he says, I'm keeping metaltalin, but doesn't identify which metaltalin, maybe an Eved is included in that. Now, finish up that Rashbam. The Rashbam says, so what do you see from that? That people sometimes call avadim metaltalin. Now, what's the chiddush in that? Avagav diktani dikar karka lav dafka elu adin metaltalin umasnisin nami metaltali kadei parnasasu kimikarka idami. So what do you see from this? You see from this that halacha l'maisa, that the term karka doesn't necessarily just have to mean karka. That karka means property, and property can mean real property. Property can mean movable property. So again, you might want to suggest before that whenever we say karka always means karka, dafka karka. But here we see it's not necessarily true. Now, by the way, the Gemara just says that holding back metaltalin is not considered to be a shear by ksuva. Now that case, actually, if you take a look at the Rashbam says we saw this. Tisnan gabi ahi. This the Rashbam. It's right across the Rashbam. V'lo as metaltalin shear eitzel ksuva. Tisnan gabi dahi m'seches peo perkin dela'el ma'sin la parshin la kosiv nechasav lebanav v'kasav leishto karka kol shehu of the ksuvasa. Remember this case? A man is giving his estate to his sons, and while doing that, he gives a piece of property to his wife. So remember again, the wife is very honored to be inheriting, to be receiving along with the sons, and therefore she is mocha the rest of her ksuva for that piece of property that she receives. Even if the value of the property is less than the value of the ksuva, she's mocha. On the other hand, if she gets metaltalin, she's not mochel. Okay, fine. So I'll say, point over here is, you see that karka doesn't just mean karka. Karka could also mean metaltalin. To which the Gemara says, no. It's not necessarily a proper comparison. Why is that? So I'll say, Hassam, in the Mishnah we quoted before, which was the case of Kosev Kol Nechasav La'avdav, person writes all of his property to his Eved, which is a Mishnah in Peah. Hassam, Bedinhu Delo Lisni Karka. The truth is, in the Mishnah in Peah, there's absolutely no reason to go ahead and even write karka. You don't have to write karka, because you could write the Gemara says v'aydi detani reisha. But since the beginning of that Mishnah read Rabbi Akiva Omer karka kolshu chayeves bepeya, and I will say the Mishnah of kosei kol nechasav la'avdov is a Mishnah in peya. Peya is the mitzvah to leave a corner of your field for the poor. So since the beginning of that Mishnah starts by saying, Rabbi Akiva Omer, karka kolshu chayeves bepeya, that any amount of karka, right, is chayev in peya. It's interesting how, just as an aside, right, that Allah we have a big field or a small field, any amount of peya is any amount of karka is chayev in peya, or bikurim, and in bikurim as well. Well, see, these are all the halachos of karka. Any amount of karka is going to be chayev in peya. Any amount of karka that produces produce is going to be chayiv in bikurim. Any amount of karka you can write a pruzbol. And remember again, pruzbol is when you go ahead and give over your debts to Beis Din in order that Shemitah doesn't go ahead and cancel them. You need some amount of real property to secure that. V'liknos imay nechasin sheish lenachrayis b'kesef b'shtar u'b'chazaka. Furthermore, again, remember, there's something called the kinyan agov, that you could go ahead and acquire metaltalin on the back of karka. Now, the metaltalin doesn't actually have to be on the karka itself. That's how we paskin. You don't need siburin, right? It doesn't have to be piled on the karka. But when you acquire the karka, you acquire the metaltalin. How much karka do you need for a kinyan agov? Any amount. Any amount. Good. So therefore, Mishum Hachi Katani Karka. So in the Mishnah in Peah, only because the Reisha began with karka. So therefore, again, we added in karka in the Seifa. The Gemara says that's why. The Gemara says fine. That's the only reason why it went ahead and added it in. Okay. So therefore, I will say halacha l'maisa. The Gemara says that's not really a valid proof, and it is still quite possible that halacha l'maisa karka really does mean karka. We tried to prove that it doesn't. It could also mean metaltalin. But the proof that the Gemara brought was not really conclusive. So the Gemara goes weiter. A different question. So now the Gemara is jumping on the other statement. Because remember again, we made two statements when it comes to this matna shchimira. That if the shchimira retains any amount of karka, so then ultimately, again, it's not considered to be a gift with a t'nai, and therefore, even when he recovers, the gift remains. So now, before we were challenging, does karka just mean karka? Now we're asking over here, what about kolshu? Right? It says if you retain any amount of karka. So what's the shaila now? Does any mean any? Now, we'll say, what does kolshu sound like? Kolshu sounds like anything. Is that really what it means? Is that true? Whenever it says kol shu, there's no shear. Vatnan, we learned Rabbi Dosa ben Herkinus Omer Chamesh Rechilos Gozizos Mana Upras Chayavos Bereishis Hagaz. So we'll say there's an interesting halacha of Reishis Hagaz, which means you have to give the first of your wool shearings to the Kohen. It's one of the matnos kahuna. So if you have sheep and you are shearing your sheep, you have to give the first shearings to the Kohen. Now, interestingly enough, there's a shear. There's an amount. There's a basic floor amount of shearings that you have to have in order to be chayiv. What do you have to have? So the Gemara says, mana paras, so 1.5 manos are chayiv in reishis hagas. So you have to have 5 sheep, which produce 1.5 mana of wool. That's the shear. The Chum say, Chamesh Rechilos Gozizos Kol Shein. The Chum say, there's no shear. Which, interestingly enough, what you need is a minimum of 5 sheep. But it doesn't matter how much wool they produce. A lot of wool, a little bit of wool, so there's no wool requirements. You see, they say Kol Shehu means any amount. V'amrinan, Bekama Kol Shein. Now the Gemara says, 1 second. How much is any amount? Bekama Kol Shein. Amarav mana upras, 1.5 manas. Obavat shi'ehei michumashos. As long as ultimately, again, 1/5 of that amount comes from each of the sheep. So interestingly enough, the wool yield, the wool output has to be evenly divided amongst the sheep. Now, both say, what do you see from there? That kol shehu doesn't just mean any amount. Kol shu can mean a small amount, but even a small amount ultimately has a definition. To which the Gemara says, no. Hasam bedinhu telo lisni kol shu. In reality, by this case, you didn't even have to use the words kol shu, because remember again, the Chazal, the rabbis are giving a shir. They are giving a shir. Va'idi de ka'amar tanakama shiura rabba. Amar iu shnami shiura zuta karle kol shu. Now the rabbis say, here's the difference. Since at the end of the day, there's such disparity between the shir, between the amount, between Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus and the Chachamim. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus' shir is a large shir, and the Chachamim's shir is a small shir. The Gemara called the shir of the Chachamim kol shehu. Kol shehu, representing that obviously it is much less than the shir of Rabbi Dosa, but obviously kol shehu. What the Gemara is just proving over here is we normally think that like kol shehu just means anything, any amount, no shir. In this case, you see over here that kol shehu does mean a shir. To which the Gemara says, you're right, but it's not really a proof, because at the end of the day, you didn't even really need this lashon of kol shehu at all, because everyone is giving exact shiurim. So why use the lashon of kol shehu? It's more used for contrast purposes. The first opinion was a large amount. The second opinion is a small amount. So the second opinion compared to the first opinion is a kol shehu. Okay, beautiful. Says the Gemara. So pshita. Some interesting cases over here. So pshita amar metaltali laplanya. So let's listen to this. So now Shchimira says, I hereby convey my metaltalin to Ruvain. That's what he says. Metaltala. So let's say, what's the halacha? Kol mani tashmishta kani lebar mechiti visari. So pretty much what he does is he's giving over to Ruvain everything. Kol mani tashmishta. In other words, any utensils, any items, movable items, with the exception of wheat and barley. So essentially what the Gemara is saying is like this. Metaltalin means movable property, like utensils, but it doesn't include food. Now, what's the chiddush over there? I will say, is food metaltalin? Is food metaltalin? Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, food is movable. But the Gemara understands that's not really what metaltalin means. Metaltalin really means movable property and not movable food. And not food. Okay, fine. The Gemara says, what happens if Shchimira uses the lashon, I hereby give all of my metaltalin to Ruvain, then afilu chiti is sari. Then that's going to include food. Why? What is he adding in over here? Kol. That one word, everything changes the dynamic over here, and therefore will include the food. Not only that, we'll say first wide line on Kuf Nun Amud Aleph 150a. Not only that, the Gemara says, Vafilu rechayim ha'alyona kana lebam rechayim ha'tachtona. Furthermore, it also includes the upper millstone, but not the lower millstone. So let's remember again, a mill had two stones. The upper stone was small and mobile. The lower stone was much bigger and wasn't really moved. So again, interestingly enough, so you see the progression. If Shchimira says, I give my metaltalin to Ruvain, so that includes really all movable property. Utensils, doesn't include food. If Shchimira says, I'm giving all my metaltalin to Ruvain, then that's going to include all movable property, food, and even the upper stone of the millstone, but not the lower millstone. Okay? Kol dimitaltal. So notice the shift in lashon. We've gone from metaltalin to kol dimitaltal. Anything which is movable. So that is a much more expansive statement. In that case, afilu rechayim ha'tachtona kani. In that case, Shchimira is conveying everything. So again, movable property, food, upper millstone, lower millstone, includes everything. See, by the way, so now the Gemara asks a kasha. So avda kimikarka or kimitaltal dami. So here's the shayla. What is an eved like? Is it an eved like karka or is an eved like metaltalin? Which one? So the Gemara says, good. If you take a look at the Rashban, I both say, I know at first glance, this seems like a very strange question, because we've always operated under the idea that an eved is like karka. So what's the shaila? Take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam is about 10 lines up from the bottom. Nihi vade de abda kimikarka idami le'in shvua v'kinyan kesef u'b'shtar v'chazaka d'chol mili da'oraisa din mikarka yesh lahem mivihisnachaltem l'bnechem acharechem aval in yelosha b'nei adam mikru luhu metaltali v'yeshtam b'chlal matnas metaltali. So we'll say, so here's the shaila. The Gemara is understanding that, of course, for halachic matters, an eved is considered to be karka. That we know. The shaila is in terms of the way people speak, right? Because remember, again, as we're seeing over here, these deathbed gifts are conveyed verbally, and the meaning of those words is very much dependent by how just contemporarily we understand those words, right? That's where you see the difference. Metaltali, kol metaltali, kol dimetaltel, all these different things. So the shaila is, in the way that people speak, do people, even though halachically I know that avodim are karka, but do people refer to avodim as karka or ultimately again as metaltalin? So I'm going to Rav Avi Ravashi Tashma. Let's analyze. Hamocher es ha'ir. So what's the interesting case over here? So it says as follows: Hamocher es ha'ir. So a person sells a city. So let's say again, Reuven owns a city. Hey, so again, own a city. So we'll say, so now the Gemara is talking about over here. When you sell a city, what is included? What is included in the sale of that city? So when you go ahead and you sell a city, included in the sale of that city are homes, ditches, pits, water cisterns, bathhouses, olive presses, all these different things, right? So the Gemara says, avalos hamataltalin, but no metaltalin, right? So movable property is not included in the sale of the city. Ubizman she'amar hi v'chomasha b'solcha. But if you go out and you sell a city, right? I sell a city to Reuven, and I say, Reuven, I'm selling you the city and everything in it. Afilu hayu ba behema o avodim harikulan mechurin. So I'll say again, if I sell Reuven a city and I'm selling you the city and everything in it, then what's included? What's included? Everything. Now if you look at the lashon over here, it says everything, including what? Including livestock and avodim. So the Gemara said, now listen to this. So again, if you tell me that avodim are treated like metaltalin, then it makes sense, because that's why avodim are not included in the initial sale. Because remember again, essentially when you sell a city, anything that is, and you just sell stam, the city, anything that is karka or attached to karka is going to be included in the sale. Any metaltalin is not included in the sale. So therefore in the Reisha it makes sense that avodim, if you say avodim are metaltalin, then it makes sense in the Reisha that avodim are not included in the sale. Ella, but if you say that avodim are like karka, then amailom is dabin. Then why would avodim not be included in the initial sale of the city? So what do you see from above? Say, what do you see? You see that avodim are like metaltalin. Are like metaltalin. So I'll say, so I just want to point out how fascinating that is, right? So what you have over here, according to what the Gemara is suggesting, is that halacha l'maisa, an eved, although we know that we'll call it kinyanically, right? Kinyanically, and in certain respects, halachically and identity-wise, an eved is like karka, right? An eved is acquired like karka. An eved is inherited like karka. But yet, in terms of how people talk, how they refer to an eved is often referred to as metaltalin. So the Gemara says, the elamai ki metaltalin dami. Rather, what do you see from here? That an eved is like metaltalin. So the Gemara says, ki metaltalin dami. My afilu elamai is techol meimar shani metaltal denayid mi metaltal delo nayid. So we'll say, so again, interestingly enough, and what's unique about karka? What's unique about avodim? That even though an eved is metaltalin, interestingly enough, it's metaltalin that moves on its own. And maybe again, there are different categories of metaltalin. So that's why when it says afilu avodim, even avodim are included, because an eved is a different type of metaltalin. Because metaltalin ultimately, again, generally doesn't move on its own. It's easily movable, but doesn't move on its own. But yet an eved is a type of metaltalin that moves on its own. To which the Gemara says, by the way, afilu timek karka dami, Even if you say that an eved is like karka, so shiny mikarka, denayin mikarka delo nayid. Ultimately, again, an eved would be in a different category of karka, because generally, again, karka is immobile, but avodim are mobile. So just before we go on, I just want to mention something. So I think that there's a profound Musar Haskell in this. If you look at what the Gemara is saying over here, is that an eved is both like karka and like metaltalin. So I'll say, if you notice, I think that there's a profound metaphor in here that karka is stationary. Karka remains in place. Metaltalin moves. Perhaps also what the Gemara is teaching us, b'derech hashkafa, is what's the job of a yid? The job of a yid is to become an eved Hashem. It's to become a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what does it mean? How does one actualize that identity? And the answer is you have to be both karka and metaltalin. Karka means I'm stuck in place. That there are certain things that I will not move on. Certain things that I will not compromise. I'm standing my ground and I'm absolutely immobile. There are certain tenets of faith. There are certain tenets of hashkafa. There's certain halachas, and no matter what, I'm not moving. I think about this like so often. Again, it's for me very meaningful. Learning this Gemara on Erev Shabbos. My grandfather Zichron Livracha came here after the war. Lost his job every Erev Shabbos when he first came to this country because he refused to work on Shabbos. He had a young family, had no other means of supporting them. There was no account. He lost everything. And everyone during the war. Came to this country with 2 young children born in the DP camps and would not work on Shabbos. There are certain things in life you have to be karka about. You can't move. You can't move me. I'm stuck in place and I will not compromise. On the other hand, you also have to be metaltalin. What's metaltalin? Metaltalin is moving around. And this represents 2 things. Number 1, it represents that on certain things you do have to be mobile. Right? You can't stand your ground on everything. You have to learn when to yield and when to give in and when to be mevater. Metaltal also represents constant movement and growth. Right? This called the metaltal. So this perfect combination of a person, an eved Hashem, an eved has to be karka and an eved has to be metaltalin. What are the things that you are immobile on? What are the things that you are stationary on? And then what are the things in which you're willing to give in on, willing to yield on, and what represents your desire for unquenchable growth. Metaltalin, karka, it's the eved in the Gemara, and it's becoming the eved of life. Such a profound Gemara. All right, let's go weiter. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, good. Tashma. So again, we're still trying to figure this out. Is an eved karka or is an eved metaltalin? So says the Gemara. Amrli Rabbi Ravashi Tashma. Hakosev. Li avdo kol nechasav yatsa ben chorin. Share karka koshu lo yatsa ben chorin. So again, it's like we were saying before. Person goes ahead and writes his property to his eved. So the eved becomes a ben chorin. If, on the other hand, the master retains some amount of karka for himself, he doesn't go free. Rabbi Shimon says, "The olam hu ben chorin at shomer kol nechasan esun leploni abdi chutz mi echad ribo shebahen." So Rabbi Shimon says, in reality, holding back karka does not prevent the eved from going free. What does prevent the eved from going free? When the master retains a percentage of the estate for himself. That's where it's problematic, because in that ambiguous percentage, perhaps again the eved is included there. B'amrav Dimi Bar Yosef, Amrav Elazar, Asu Metaltal Shir Eitzel Eved, V'lo Asu Metaltal Shir Eitzel Ksor. So it says this is literally the same exact Gemara we just had on top of the Amid. So again, holding back property. Holding back metaltalin could be a problem for the emancipation of the eved. But interestingly enough, the metaltalin case doesn't work by the isha. Remember again, I'll say quickly again, what was the case of the ksuva? The case of the ksuva is the husband is gifting his estate to the sons. He gives property to his wife as well. The wife is so honored to be included to be one of the recipients that halacha l'maisa again she forgives the rest of her ksuva claim. That only applies if he's gifting her property, real property, land. Does not apply if it's metaltalin. V'amrle Rav Nachman, and Rav said to Rav Nachman, I don't understand. My taima, what's the reason for this? Avda metaltalahu, an Eved is metaltalin, and therefore what says the Gemara? Umetaltala lemetaltala havishir. And again, halacha lemaisa, holding back metaltalin. So therefore, again, if you treat the Eved like metaltalin, so therefore, again, if I'm gifting, I'm the master, and I'm going ahead and I'm saying to the Eved, I'm giving you my entire estate, except for 1/1000th, right? And again, that 1/1000th could be karka, could be metaltalin, and we're concerned that what I'm actually retaining is the Eved himself. So you see from here that an Eved is treated like metaltalin, and therefore when I withhold metaltalin, there's a real problem with the emancipatory process that the Eved may not be undergoing. That wasn't good English. When I withhold the metaltalin, the concern is what I am withholding may be the Eved himself, because the Eved is treated like metaltalin as well. On the other hand, the Gemara says ksuvas isha mekarko, but on the other hand, the ksuva of a wife is real property. Umetaltala lemekarka lo havishir, and therefore giving the wife some metaltalin, right, is not going to cause her to release the lien on her ksuva. But I will say again, but what do you see from here? This is pretty explicit. What do you see from here? That an Eved is considered to be metaltalin. So the Gemara says, Amud Beis, Amrle anan mishum delo kras gita masnin Allah. See, interestingly enough, as he explained, actually there's a different issue over here. What's the different issue? The reason why the Eved doesn't go free in this case is for something else. Take a look at the Rashbam. It's actually quite interesting. The anan mishum delo kras gita masnin Allah Eved gomer lo meisha. So we'll say. So remember again. Interestingly enough, the emancipation process of an Eved is very similar to the get process. We learn out a lot of halachos. Actually, there's a gzera shava of law from a woman to an Eved, meaning that halacha lemaisa, the same way that an Eved requires a document of emancipation, right, a get shechrar, so an isha woman requires a get in order to leave a marriage as well. So the Gemara says as follows: the ba'ina and get krisos. Now watch this. The chivon diish lebal ha'eved zuchos b'shtar shekasubo sheshir karko umetatli la'atzmo lo hikna lo hashtar legamrei shegam schusa adon kasabo hilchach lo karinon be get krisos ki inyan zeh pirish avenu chanano the gam yishtafarish gam li olam avda kimikakai. So we'll say. So therefore, again, the Gemara says as follows. The issue over here is as follows. The same way, when a husband writes, let's say a get for his wife, and he divorces her, but let's say he keeps some clause in there that demonstrates. Let's say this is your get on the condition. Gemara gives different examples of this. Like, this is your get on the condition that you never go to your father's house. So the issue is, a get is called a get krisos. What's the definition of krisos? The relationship is done. How does that manifest itself? You have no control over me, right? In other words, you have no say over what it is that I do. So the moment that a husband retains some element of input into or control over what his wife does, that's not a get. That's not a get. The same concept ultimately applies in emancipation of an Eved. So as long as the Adon is retaining something, it's not full emancipation. So the Gemara says that's the issue over here. It's not really an issue of karka versus metaltalin. It's an issue of that the document of emancipation is not complete because in some way the master is still retaining some level of control. Just finish up that. Rashmami says, "V'gam yesh tafarish kach li'olam avdu ki mikakoi dami v'gabe get amay chashvin afilu metaltalin shir eitz lavet hainu time mishum dekrisos gamar ba'inon v'cheivan shezeh shir metaltalin man leimulan de lahalev dati." Fine, okay. So different interpretation there. Both say. So the idea over here is, so what's the maskana? What's the conclusion? The conclusion is that really, for our purposes, what we'll call, 9 out of 10 times in halacha, we continue with the motif that we've always known to be true, which is an Eved is karka. An Eved is karka. That's really what we know to be true. Halacha l'maisa, we just begin to see that in terms of some of the verbiage used with avodim, that sometimes avodim are considered to be metaltalin as well. But again, it's much more I'll call it from a verbal perspective than from an actual halachic perspective. Okay, let's go back there. Plus a couple of interesting cases over here. Amar Rav Nachman, Chamisha ad shichtivu kol nichsein. So we'll say there are 5 cases. 5 cases where halach l'maisa, again, these people, they're all giving a matana. They're all giving a matana, and their matana is not complete until they convey all of their property. Okay, so take a look at the Rashbam. Amar Nachman Chamish, almost right across the Rashbam. Nostim matana hein she'in dinan chaluk minostim mixas ad sheyichtivu kol nechsehen. Ve'az dinan chaluk mi mishayer k'tzas mimenu. Okay, go. So what says the idea is there are 5 people. Rabbi says, name Rav Nachman. There are 5 people where in order for their gift to have a special and unique status, they must be gifting their entire estate. Failure to gift the entire estate, the gift is still valid, but it's just a regular gift. Okay, we'll go through the list. Ve'eluhin, these are the 5. Shchimira, Avdo, one servant. Again, we'll see all of these cases. Ishto, right, wife, banav, children, mavrachas. Okay, mavrachas literally means one who wants to shield their property or remove their property from someone else. Well, again, like I said, we'll get into all of these cases. Here we go. Let's analyze. Shchimira. So what's that? Shchimira. What's the case of shchimira? So we'll say, even before we go into this, we know this. What's halach with shchimira? A shchimira in general, a deathbed gift, is like a gift given als t'nai, with the condition. What's the condition? What's the condition? If I die, this is a gift. And if I recover, then I want it back. Like we said before, that tonight only kicks in when the shchimra is gifting his entire estate. So shchimra disnan shchimra shekasav kol nechasav lachirim v'shir karka kol shehu. So shchimra goes ahead and writes his estate to someone else, and he retains some karka for himself. Matanasa kayames. Ultimately, again, the matana is good. Now we'll say now what that means is, so in this case over here, he's gifting the property but retaining some for himself. So then the lashon over here is a little, I don't know, it seems to be a little confusing. Matanasa kayames means his gift stands. His gift is good. Now what does it mean his gift is good? It means that even if he recovers from his illness, he cannot claw back the gift. Okay. On the other hand, lo shia karka kol shehu, but if halacha l'maisa again he did not retain anything for himself, then ein matanas kayames. What that means is, and he didn't retain anything for himself, and he then recovers, ultimately again the gift does not stand, and he has the ability to claw it back for himself. Okay, so we'll say, so there, what do you see from here? That halacha l'maisa, a true matna shchimira only applies when someone is gifting his entire estate. Next, avdo. What's the case of eved? Disnan hakoseb kol nechasav la'avdo yatsa ben chorin. So we just saw this before, right? If a person goes ahead and, so in this case over here, if I gift my entire estate to my eved, by definition, my eved goes free by dint of that gift, because part of my estate is him. So what I'm also doing is I'm going ahead and conveying to my eved himself. Shir karka kolshu. If, however, halacha l'maisa, again, the eved retains some, or I should say, I, the owner, retains some property for myself. Lo yatsa ben chorin. The eved does not go free. Why doesn't the eved go free? Because we're concerned that in that ambiguous retention of property, what's included in that retained property? The eved himself. Okay, that's example number 2. So I'll say again, just to follow the train of thought, there are 5 cases where in order to avail yourself of the unique benefits of the gift, it has to be a gift in totality of everything that you own. Good. Next, Ishto. What's the case of the wife? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel hakosif kol nechasav leishto lo asa ela apetropa. So also remember we saw this, that if a person gifts his entire estate to his wife, then we don't really view that as a gift. Rather, what do we view it as? He's making her the apotropos, right? He's making her ultimately, again, the executor of the estate. Because remember, again, also we spoke on this idea that it's uncommon. It's uncommon for a person to go ahead and gift their entire estate to their wife to the exclusion of their children. It's just a strange dynamic. So rather, again, we better understand it to mean that halacha l'maisa he's making her the apotropos. Okay, banav. What's the case of banav? Sons. Disnan hakoseb kol nechasav lebanav v'kasav leishta kol shehu avda ksuvasa. So we'll say similar again. Here's the case of a person who goes ahead and he's giving his estate to his sons, and we referenced this case multiple times in Amud Aleph. And alongside the gift to his sons, he also gives a piece of property to his wife. So in that case, remember again, it's a covet that she is receiving, along with the son's real property, ownership over property, and therefore halacha l'maisa she forgives her ksuva over the rest of the estate. But once again, that dynamic only applies when he's giving away everything. Mavrechas, what's the case of mavrechas? So the Gemara says, Mavrechas, the Amar Mar, Mavrechas tzricha shetichtov kol nechasel. If ultimately, again, she wants to go ahead, and I will say, take a look at, before we get into this, take a look, what is the case of Mavrechas? So I will say, if you take a look about 8 lines up from before it gets wide, the Rashbam, Mavrechas, the Amar Mar, Kilomar, Isha Almana, Sheyesh la nechasim. Supposed to have Rachel. Rachel's a widow, and Rachel is a widow with assets. Right? She has property. So what's the halacha? V'daita linase. Now Rachel wants to get remarried. V'rotza lahavriach nechasea mi baila shelo yehei zakai b'nechasea. So what happens? Rachel's married to Reuven. She was widowed. She has property. Now she's marrying Shimon, but she does not want Shimon to have her property. Okay, probably a little bit of like a red flag already, right? No, I'll say you can have this. She has property. She wants a prenup. She has a prenup. She doesn't want her. She has kids. She loves Shimon very much. Not that much, but in other words, she does not want him to have the property that she has going into this marriage. So what's the halacha? V'rotza lahavriach nechaseh mibayla shelo yehei zakai b'nechaseh v'im tisalmin o tiskaresh yachzuru la nechaseh. And therefore, again, just in the event ultimately again that she is widowed or divorced, she just wants to have the property. So I'll say, so ultimately, again, obviously, anytime a woman brings property into a marriage, a husband, by definition, has rights in that property. She doesn't want her husband to have rights in the property, so she just kind of wants to keep her property out of the marital pool. So how do you do that? So the Gemara says, so the Mishnah says, Varmina b'ksuvis, sorry, Rashbam says, Varmina b'ksuvis, from the ksuvis, tzricha shetichtov kol nechasel la'achar, stam. Kevan delo shayri mide anansadi delo nitna lze ela b'shol shorotze linase, or l'cheshetirtze yachseru la. People say, well, so what could she do? She just gifts that property to someone else. So she's marrying Shimon. She says, I hereby gift my entire estate to Levi. Now I will say, now in halacha, what we understand is this is a little bit of like it's like a tax shelter, but for marriage. Like in other words, so what she's doing over here is she's creating a halachic shelter for her property so that she can move her property out of the marriage pool so that her husband is not going to have anything to do with it. But it's understood that she has the right to call the gift whenever she wants. In other words, she can ask for it back whenever she wants it. First white line Rashbam, but again, whenever she wants it back, all she needs to do is say, I want it back, and it comes back to her. Now, both say, now when does that work? So again, along our same lines, when does that work? When she gives away everything. However, the Rashbam says, Avalim Shaira, Kol Shehu, Kanaha Mekabel, so we'll say, but again, halacha l'maisa, let's say she gifts most of her property to Reuven, but retains something for herself, then halacha l'maisa, again, that is not going to work. So we'll say, so let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows, fine. So the Gemara says that so those are the 5 cases where in order to avail yourself of the unique status of these gifts, you have to be gifting everything in its entirety. And we'll say in all of these cases, so retaining metaltalin is considered to be retaining property, except for ksuva. So we've seen this already many different times. Because when it comes to ksuva by definition only devolves upon metaltalin, does not devolve upon, ksuva only devolves upon karka, not upon metaltalin. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Ameimar Amar, Mitantali Dichsiv Biksuva, Visnu Beinayo Habishir. So Ameimar says there is an exception to this. The exception to this would be if you have metaltalin written in the ksuva itself, and those metaltalin are extant, then Einachinami retention of those properties could actually be a shir. So we'll stop over here for today. Pick up tomorrow with Amar Nechasa upon a new case. We'll say tremendous shkoyach. What a beautiful and incredible week together. Such a schos. And Meretz Hashem, we'll continue. We're actually nearing the end, not so far away from the end of Basra, Meretz Hashem. We'll say shkoyach. Good Shabbos. All right, Chaver on Zoom. Chaver on Zoom. Good Shabbos, everyone. The good Erev Shabbos from Jerry. Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. Again, Chaver, we look forward to Mir Hashem to celebrating many simchas together. It should be a Shabbos of Besoros Tov, also Shabbos of Simchas, Shabbos of Aliyah, Shabbos of Menucha for us, for all of Klal.